The poetry of Nellie Sachs. Liani Nellie Sachs lived from 1891 to 1970. She was born in Berlin, Germany, and was an upper middle class Jew. She escaped Germany to get to Stockholm, wrote for many years about the sadness in her life, filled with the death of family members and so forth, and spent time actually in mental institutions in her earlier years. She wrote poetry and drama, and in 1967 she published a book which I have back at home and I'll bring to class, called Oh, the Chimneys, which is the single most accessible collection of all her work. It was published actually in 6 languages, and I have not had a chance to read through it. I just got a hold of it recently. And then I came across this article, of course, which I thought was an interesting connection there. She began writing for publication in 1907. This study that I read about explored the roles played by women in Sachs's poetry as accessible to English-speaking readers. And it says that she writes of the agony of loss and the feminine experience of the fearful consequences to individuals and to the world Jewry caused by mass murder in a framework of renewing hope and rebirth. In a book called In the Habitations of Death, one of her poems, Oh, the Night of the Weeping Children, in that poem, we see women relate to loss. She reverses the traditional image of the woman who care for the children. Another paradox, instead of mother's milk, panic suckles those little ones. She uses the metaphor of panic is what nurtures these babies. Sachs makes use of sentence length, punctuation, exclamation points, rather along expressionist and traditionalist lines to convey the message, grief. The first line of each stanza draws out the emotion expressed in the poetry, as it were a wall ending in a whisper of horror. The poem ends with a series of images: an abandoned doll, a stuffed toy, and nightshirts over the hair no one will ever comb again. Many of her poems contain the alternate descriptions of destruction and renewal. Mother invoking sacrificial aspects of maternal or caring adult love, unable to protect her own baby. This poem, followed by another poem, seems to promise consolation just by the title start, already embraced by the arm of heavenly solace. This poem contains the figure of the mother as an example for all the suffering, empathetic humanity, as did in the earlier poem. It is intensified, death seeming to be the only answer to helpless suffering in her poetry. And the article went on to examine all the poems in this collection of her poetry, but that was just an example of one itself. And so with that, I think that's enough for right now. We'll pick it up with Ravensbrück as a unique camp next time. And let me just tell you what's unique about Ravensbrück. That Ravensbrück was a camp that was built especially for women only. And this was the first time that had been done. It was a camp where we have documentation of the slaughter, mass slaughter of 130,000 women. It was women and girls and some of their children. They died of slaughter, torture, hard labor, and bizarre medical experiments, all on the female anatomy. Jewish prisoners accounted for about 15% of the total at Ravensbrück. The camp was originally built to suppress opposition to the Nazi regime and to isolate those considered outcasts in the society. but most of the Jews were brought there later on between 1944 and 1945. Some of the women were sent there with their children. Ravensbrück was therefore a social crossroads. Women from different social strata, national, ethnic, religious origin, all forced to live together under the most inhumane and horrific extreme conditions. The Nazis actually set up a hierarchy, almost like a society within the group of women, with the Jewish women being on the very bottom of the hierarchy, the bottom of the scale, and receiving the worst possible treatment of all. Non-Jewish women were processed into the camp more quickly, whereas upon their arrival, Jewish women would be forced to lay out in an uncovered area with no roof in a yard, without blankets, in freezing cold, on a straw mattress, with rain and so on, until they finally got around to processing them into the camp. But Ravensbrück was not really investigated by Holocaust historians until the 1990s. I thought that was very interesting fact, that they waited till then, because it was in Germany most Jews who were being sent to the east, to Poland, and so camps like Ravensbrück were not seen as mainstream camps to the Holocaust. They were marginal, I guess might be the word. Later it was used as a model camp, Ravensbrück, and they sent the commander of Ravensbrück to Auschwitz to set up the women's camp there. So what remains today, all we have is recollections of the Jewish women who did arrive during the last days of the war and had been there for a short time. Oh, by the way, Ravensbrück is right outside Berlin, in the town of Fürstenberg, which is one of the places I plan to go on my next trip back to Berlin. I just ran out of time last year.